no co-commentator for this one. Although, for those of you who are wondering, I don't know why you would be wondering this, but I did not go see this movie alone. But I apparently was alone in my opinion. Me and my brother and I went to see The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, just a quick recap, or just a real quick. I liked it, or I did not like it. He did like it. So that caused a bit of a disagreement on the drive home, but the point is, he thought, despite having a rocky first act, he thought it really picked up later on and turned into what he thought was better than the first one. I, on the other hand, think it's probably the worst theatrical Spider-Man movie I've ever seen. Now, I will elaborate on that, but first I'm going to recount the trailers. The first trailer we got was something called Earth to Echo, I think something like that, which honestly looks like a sequel to Super 8. I don't really have too much of an opinion on that. It doesn't look bad. It looks kind of like early Spielberg. It doesn't really seem all that necessary, but again, I can't really form much of an impression on it since that was the trailer that I actually walked in on. Another trailer we got was the remake of Annie. Now, again, why did Annie need a remake? I don't know. Annie is one of those movies that has been done to death. I mean, Annie needed a remake about as much as The Sound of Music needed a remake. Or RoboCop. Granted, RoboCop has not had nearly as many adaptations. In fact, it wasn't even based on a book. There's not really a book called RoboCop. Or I'm so tired. This movie made me tired. I'm sorry, it did. But, yeah, the Annie trailer, it doesn't really look like anything special. I mean, it looks like they're trying to, quote-unquote, modernize, or actually urbanize, the story of Annie. I mean, it looks like it's set in New York, or a city that looks a lot like New York. It has Cameron Diaz, Jamie Foxx. So, yeah, I'm withholding judgment, but the primary reason for that is that I've had very little experience with the story of Annie, so I can't really tell you if this looks like a faithful adaptation or not. Annie's just not my cup of tea. I don't really like the music all that much. Again, I understand why it's critically acclaimed, and I can concede that the music is iconic. It's just, it doesn't really speak to me that much. Got the X-Men trailer again, which that looks about as good as ever. I'm still really excited for X-Men. What else? Oh, we got the Ninja Turtles trailer. That still looks just as bad as you might think. I mean, it's the same trailer that has been leaked, or not really leaked, but it's the same trailer that has been released online, where at the end Michelangelo takes off his mask and he looks like a hideous human turtle hybrid. Which I should have known that that's the way they would look going in, considering they were doing motion capture, but at the same time, I don't really know how mad I can get because I never watched any of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle shows growing up. I mean, the 1987 TV series was a little bit before my time, and the 2003 TV series never really appealed to me. Although, again, I understand the appeal. So, so by extension, I can understand how some people are pissed off at this trailer. It doesn't really look very good. It doesn't look like a very good Ninja Turtle movie. It seems unsure of the tone it wants to set. But again, I'm not going to say too much about that. The final trailer that I can remember is something called Edge of Tomorrow. It stars Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. Now, I had actually not got around to watching the trailer for this, thus up to this point. And the poster and the title kind of, I know this is judging a book by its cover, but the poster and the title kind of made it look like a sequel to Oblivion. And Oblivion I kind of liked. I mean, it was terribly flawed, but Oblivion I didn't think was that bad. I mean, it's, call it a guilty pleasure if you want, but Oblivion I thought was serviceable enough. Not great by any stretch of the imagination, but no, it turns out Edge of Tomorrow is something completely different. And just based on the premise, or what I can remember from what they revealed in the trailer, it looks pretty interesting. It kind of looks like a cross between your standard post-apocalyptic world and something like Memento. It looks actually more cerebral than Oblivion. So, yeah, for the first time, I'm actually kind of intrigued by that. But then again, I was intrigued by Transcendence, and look where that turned. Look where that turned up. Well, that's about it for the trailers, or at least as far as I can remember. So, the movie itself, the plot of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, or I should say plots, but again, I'll get to that. The plot this time around basically revolves around Peter Parker trying to balance his life as Spider-Man with his life as Peter Parker. It's the same stuff you've seen before, at least it is on paper. He's graduating from high school, and he's desperately trying to maintain a relationship with Gwen Stacy, despite the fact that A, he's having a difficult time being there for her, and B, he's seeing these kind of spectral visions of her dad. And he's kind of remembering the promise that he made to Captain Stacy, like, stay away from Gwen, leave her out of it. So, that's the basic gist. While at the same time, he's kind of trying to reconnect with Harry Osborn, a long lost friend from his childhood, who has just returned to town and is going to inherit the Oscorp, who is going to inherit the Oscorp company from his ailing father. Also, an Oscorp employee named Max Dillon comes to eventually worship Spider-Man because he doesn't really feel like enough people notice him. He wants to be noticed. He doesn't want to be this invisible geek. He doesn't really want to be this invisible geek that he's been all of his life. He doesn't want to be stepped on anymore. He doesn't want to feel powerless. So, yeah, that's the basic premise. Now, if that somewhat convoluted description is any indication, you can probably guess what the biggest problem with this movie is. This movie, in terms of its story, is just a mess. It is an absolute train wreck. It is so... There is always like 5 different things going on every single point. And more often than not, it's 5 different unrelated things. If these plot lines if the 5 to 10 different subplots have any connection, it's the very loosest connection that you can make. And I don't usually say this. I didn't want to go here, but I can safely say, without any hesitation in my mind, the story of the Amazing Spider-Man 2 video game was a smoother experience, and it was better structured than the story in the movie. And you just think about that. If a video game can tell a better if a video game based on your movie can tell a better story than the movie itself, what does that say? What does that say about the film? What does it say about the writers of said film? And it's not like the Amazing Spider-Man 2 video game had any kind of groundbreaking story. I mean, Last of Us, it wasn't. But I'm talking about how structurally it was superior. And I didn't really like the Amazing Spider-Man 1 all that much, and I've been called out on this on several occasions. Oh, you just don't like the Amazing Spider-Man 2 because you're too nostalgic about the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. Oh, you just don't like it because you've been kind of indoctrinated by the style of the Tobey Maguire movies. You're not willing to see Spider-Man in any different light. Not true. I still think that the Tobey Maguire movies, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, were better for a number of reasons. Even Spider-Man 3. And Spider-Man 3, I concede, is the worst of the bunch, the worst of the Spider-Man trilogy. But at least those weren't trying to throw a million things at you at once. And this was a problem that I had with the first Amazing Spider-Man. And it's a problem that's amplified to an unimaginable extent in the sequel. In that, not only is it trying to tell a Spider-Man story, but it is also trying to tell a corporate espionage story. It is trying to sequel bait. It is trying to tell the story of some of the side characters. And yeah, this movie, and I know what you're going to say. You're going to point to some other superhero movie, like, well, The Dark Knight did the same thing, or Batman Begins or Dark Knight Rises they all did the same thing. No, because the difference was in those movies, all of these plot lines were connected and interwoven with much more expertise than they were here. The story was stronger because it actually focused on one central conflict and just let the characters in the story react to said conflict. The numerous subplots here, like I said, have little to no relation to each other. This is the worst Spider-Man movie I have seen in theaters. And I do not like using hyperbole like that, but it's true. This makes the first Amazing Spider-Man movie look like Spider-Man 2 in comparison. But what did I like about this movie? Because I did try to go into this movie with an open mind. I mean, I'm not going to say like, oh, well, I like the original Spider-Man movies too much, so I'm just going to go into this with a bad attitude. No, I wanted to like this movie. It's just that the writers wouldn't let me. But the acting was actually fairly solid on most fronts, anyway. Andrew Garfield still does a really good job as Spider-Man. He still has that kind of twitchy, awkward energy that's thankfully endearing without getting too annoying. I mean, you could easily turn this into a very irritating Shia LaBeouf type character, which they don't do. Andrew Garfield has charisma, so I still like him as Spider-Man. I still like Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy. I think, and this actually brings me to one of the few things that I feel that The Amazing Spider-Man did better than the Sam Raimi ones. The romance was better, and the chemistry between the two leads was far more apparent. It just clicked a lot more than with Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst. I mean, that one was not awful. The love story there was not awful, but the relationship here feels much more real. It feels more. The chemistry just sizzles between these two. It's more endearing than the at times kind of contrived relationships or kind of soap opera-esque relationships of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. So yeah, the The romance I actually thought was better this time around, as it should be, because this comes from the guy who directed 500 Days of Summer, Mark Webb. So, so yeah, the romance was predictably better in these movies. Although, despite how good Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone are, they too fall victim to the script. But again, I'll get to that in a second. Dane DeHaan plays Harry Osborn in this movie. He's actually my favorite character because he's the most interesting, and Dane DeHaan really is really this very intense presence. He gives off a very wounded presence, while at the same time kind of menacing. He can exude confidence when he needs to. This I don't know how old this kid is, but he's got to be in what, his 20s. He is so talented in this role. I really wish he was in a better movie because Dane DeHaan makes this character genuinely interesting. He makes him kind of, you feel sorry for this guy. You definitely side with the character of Harry Osborn in this. Again, some of that has to do with the script, but most of it has to do with Dane DeHaan's performance. So, real props to him. Sally Field is still fantastic as Aunt May. And they actually do a good job of giving her a bit more depth this time around than they did last time. Because last time she was kind of sidelined a little too much, at least for my taste. But yeah, they do still try to make her an active part of the story, and you can sense the very at times painful relationship that she has with her nephew. So again, props to Sally Field. Sally Field makes this character so likable and so empathetic to the audience that you really get the sense that she is this put upon aunt, this put upon maternal figure who genuinely wants what's best for Peter. And if that means keeping secrets from him, or whatever that means, you get that she is willing to do that. And I'm sorry, that makes a really likable character. I mean, it's kind of like Sarah Connor. How Sarah Connor would basically do anything to protect her son John. So yeah, Sally Field's still excellent in this movie. She can actually be pretty intense. The scenes with her and Andrew Garfield were captivating. What else? Okay. For what I've said about these four actors, the two worst actors in the movie are Jamie Foxx and Paul Giamatti. What? Jamie Foxx as Electro and Paul Giamatti as the Rhino. They are the two worst actors in the movie. How? I'll tell you how. Well, I can't really fault Jamie Foxx. I can't. He doesn't really give a bad performance. He just plays the part as it was written. He's not quite as over the top as the example I'm about to name, but he's fine once he actually becomes Electro. Before that, he's very, very creepy and off-putting, and not that kind of awkward charming that Andrew Garfield does. No, he's basically. I'll get to him in a second. As Electro, he's fine. He's fine. He's nothing great, but he's fine as Electro. But Paul Giamatti, they completely throw away Paul Giamatti in this movie. They throw him away to a bit part that presumably they hope to see more of in either the sequel or the Sinister Six movie that they want to do. But Paul Giamatti, he has no excuse. He has no excuse. The writing does not help, but he is so over the top. All he does is scream and spout this this indiscernible Russian accent. I think he's supposed to be Russian. I don't know. We never really see him talk. Like, all he does is scream. But he gives one of the worst performances of his career. This makes his performance in Planet of the Apes look like his performance in Cinderella Man. Just think about that. So yeah, Paul Giamatti is downright lousy. I don't really know why they got a high-profile actor like him to play what essentially amounts to a cameo. But I never thought the Rhino was an interesting villain. So I suppose I should be grateful that they relegated him to little more than a thug. But did they have to make him so ridiculous in terms of performance? I don't think so. Oh, God. Oh, God. Now, coming back to the biggest problem with this movie, the structure. Like I said, there are 5 different things going on all at once. There is the continued corporate espionage that was in the first movie, with Peter trying to learn more about his father and why his father left Oscorp in such a hurry and blah blah blah. There's a different corporate espionage plot dealing with Harry trying to maintain control of Oscorp and trying to fend off some of the board members. Of course, the Oscorp board is staffed by the forces of evil. So generic evil businessman guy and other generic evil businessman guy are trying to sabotage Harry Osborn's efforts to take over the company because he is 20 years old. I'm like, what is taking orders from a 20-year-old? Oh God. Oh Jesus Christ. There's the subplot having to do with the character of Max Dillon, who is Jamie Foxx's character, and how he loses faith in Spider-Man, and how he gradually descends into I shouldn't say gradually. He was always crazy. How he doesn't feel like he's noticed. There's the plot line. What are we up to now? 3? There's the plot line where Peter Parker is trying to balance out his relationship with Gwen Stacy. And I'm sorry. You know how in the first one the romance was very charming and innocent? Well, here they resort to standard romance movie cliches, like, oh no, she's moving to another city. Oh, I can't be with you because I love you too much. Oh, I can't be with you because I have some responsibility elsewhere. Oh, I love you, but I'm going to the airport now to go to another country. Oh my God, no. Oh my God. It is so contrived. And to their credit, Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield do still do a pretty good job. They still carry these scenes. They try and make these scenes interesting, but like I said, it's every single cheesy romance movie you have ever seen. That basically amounts to the relationship between Peter and Gwen in this movie. So what is that up to? 4? 4? Okay. And there's Aunt May trying to adapt to life without Uncle Ben. There's Peter trying to rekindle his old friendship with Harry Osborn. I'm sorry. They do not do a good job at all of connecting these plot lines. This movie has no semblance of narrative flow. I said that about All-Star Superman, but here it's even worse. Here, this is like a 2.5-hour movie, and it feels like it. Good God, does it feel like it? Because I was so bored in this movie. Because every time, it seems like these are 5 Spider-Man movies all jammed into one. They are trying to accomplish so much with this story that they forgot to make. I don't really think that they realized, okay, all of these plot lines, we can throw them into one movie, but they won't really cohere. Because the ideas here are interesting, I will concede that, and a lot of the scenes actually did have me invested. I mean, this is a good This is a movie with a lot of very good scenes, like Peter trying to rekindle his old friendship with Harry Osborn. I like those scenes. The scenes with Peter trying to talk to Gwen Stacy. I like those scenes, or at least some of them, before they got really cliched. The the scenes where Harry is trying to adapt to taking over the company, and where he's trying to extend his life and trying to cope with the fact that he has this terminal illness. Those were interesting scenes. They resonated emotionally with me. But the thing is, when you intercut them so amateurishly, when you let's just say they will have a scene with Peter and Gwen Stacy, then they'll switch over to a scene with Electro, then they'll switch over to a scene with Harry, and then they'll switch over to Spider-Man doing something, Spider-Man saving some people, then they'll switch back to Electro, then they'll switch to Peter and Gwen. I mean, it seems like there is no rhyme or reason to how they have organized these scenes. And if there is, it's become buried. I mean, the common theme behind all of these scenes has become buried under the scenes themselves. You could have easily made Harry and Peter's friendship and Harry's eventual descent into the Green Goblin. That could have easily been one movie. Spider-Man's the disappointment that Max Dillon harbors in Spider-Man and his eventually becoming Electro. That could have been one movie. The Rhino could have been one movie. Peter discovering something about his parents in the form of Oscorp, and Oscorp turning out to have a bunch of supervillain tech on standby in almost like an assembly line fashion. That could have been one movie. All of these, they just jam into this movie. So it ends up just this big, incoherent mess. This movie has no structure. It seems like there's a random mishmash of scenes. There is just no organization going on here. Like I said, I wanted to get invested in a lot of these scenes. Oh, and another series of scenes I got invested in. These scenes between Peter Parker and Aunt May. I really liked those scenes. They are so well acted by Andrew Garfield and Sally Field. The scenes between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone are so well acted. The scenes with Dane DeHaan and occasionally Andrew Garfield are so well acted. But the thing is, the writers don't let me get invested in these scenes, in these plot lines, because they're trying to jam so much into this one movie when it's not necessary. This would be like if in Spider-Man 2, instead of solely having Doc Ock as the villain and intercutting that with Spider-Man with Peter Parker trying to balance his life as Spider-Man with his personal life as Peter Parker, it would be like if instead of having a lot of those well-balanced scenes and making the movie feel like a very smooth experience, it would be like if they threw in, I don't know, Mysterio, or if they threw in Vulture in conjunction with him, and still had Doc Ock in the movie. It would be like that. Yeah, I really didn't like this movie. It just turned out to be a mess. It turned out to be one big mess. And this is a spoiler, or this could be considered a spoiler by some, but Gwen Stacy dies in this movie, and when they do finally do the death scene, the death of Gwen Stacy, one of the most iconic events in all of Marvel Comics, they have not earned this. They handle it well, but they haven't earned it. And the villains, I'll come back to Gwen Stacy later, but the villains were weak, because like I said, I really couldn't stand Jamie Foxx in this movie. I really couldn't stand how awkward they made this character. They didn't make this character seem like any type of real life person who would logically exist in this universe, or at least would choose to exist in New York. I mean, does this guy really have to live in New York if he wants to get noticed? There are millions of people in New York, and you want to be noticed. You work at a tech company, and you want to be noticed in New York. New York City, the Big Apple. Yeah, go cry to someone who cares. And they make him such. He's like a cartoon character. No, I've seen cartoon characters more subtle than this. You know what he is? He's like Jim Carrey from Batman Forever. I am not exaggerating. I mean, he has this shrine to Spider-Man in his apartment. He he thinks that he thinks that Spider-Man is his best friend, and he's so offended when Spider-Man doesn't remember him. Like, you don't remember me? You said I was your pal. You said you needed me. Oh God. Why is everyone paying attention to you? And he basically says he talks to himself at his Spider-Man shrine. He's like, oh, Spider-Man, it's my birthday today. How'd you know? Oh, Spider-Man, you baked me a cake? Ah, oh God, he was just unwatchable. He was just unwatchable in how weird and off-putting that they made this character. And I understand that was the point, but you still have to make us like this character. He was such a pitiful character that I didn't really like him. I didn't really sympathize with him. So he wasn't very good, and the Green Goblin, I said Harry was an interesting character, but this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about how his plotline could have made its own movie. The Green Goblin comes in toward the end of this movie. In the last 10-15 minutes of the movie, Green Goblin just shows up. He shows up. They do the Green Goblin origin story, and he just shows up for this final confrontation after the big already climactic fight with Electro. Green Goblin comes out of nowhere and kills Gwen Stacy. Well, first of all, this villain has not had time at this point to develop any semblance of menace. I know you're going to say, well, we got to know Harry Osborn throughout the entire movie. Yes, but the Green Goblin is almost a separate character in his own right. He has a very exaggerated personality. The rivalry between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin is one of the most popular rivalries in Marvel Comics. And Green Goblin is one of Spider-Man's most psychologically draining villains. Whether it is Norman or Harry Osborn in the suit, the Green Goblin has always been a recurring problem psychologically for Spider-Man. And to reduce him to this almost bit part toward the end just feels like a cheat, because he doesn't have time to develop any menace. He doesn't really have time to develop any kind of dynamic with Spider-Man. He doesn't have time to develop any rivalry with Spider-Man. I mean, he doesn't really look all that good. I mean, he looks cartoonish, so I think his cartoonish look clashes with the supposed more realistic vision that they wanted to go for in these movies. Like he's got this very static hair that's sticking up. He has these sharp teeth. He has this very Gollum-esque skin. He's got these long, baggly fingernails. Like his dad. Anyway, to reduce this villain to the last 10 minutes of the movie, it feels really rushed. It amounts to little more than a second climax. You're supposed to have been invested in the Electro fight, but then immediately after that's over, you think, oh, okay, that the movie must be over now. No, then the Green Goblin comes flying in, and we have another fight. Okay, well, how are we supposed to get invested in this? Oh, okay, Gwen Stacy is dead. Okay, well, since we barely got to know anything about the Green Goblin, then throwing in this death scene with Gwen Stacy, again, does not feel earned. The Green Goblin and Spider-Man have had no time to build up the relationship between hero and villain. Here's how I would have done this. I would have had this movie be completely about Harry Osborn, the deteriorating sanity of Harry Osborn in the wake of his impending death. He tries to reconnect with Peter. He tries to get Spider-Man's blood. He can't get it, so he resorts to extreme measures, becomes the Green Goblin, goes on a rampage, and that's about the halfway point. And then the rest of the movie is Spider-Man kind of going back and forth within Green Goblin, and then it culminates with Gwen Stacy's death. That's how I would have structured this. I would have done that, and I think it would have worked a lot better than reducing it to what essentially are two separate subplots that are thrown into one: the Gwen Stacy love story and the Harry Osborn mental deterioration, but mental and physical deterioration. But with that said, the Gwen Stacy death does feel like it has the appropriate weights. Of course, it feels sad, but the very somber manner in which they approach it, the way they take their time with it, it feels appropriately heavy. Granted, they kind of destroy that when they bring back the very cartoonish Rhino toward the end. But again, it just amounts to yet another good scene in an otherwise messy movie. Like I said, I like parts of this movie, namely the acting and a lot of the scenes by themselves, but the overall and the action scenes and the effects are still top notch. Granted, they're filmed too close up. I mean, I wish we could have panned the camera back a bit. And the opening action scene on the plane with Richard and Mary Parker is just shot so poorly. It's shot with such bad shaky cam. But aside from that, the overall finished package, no matter what I like about this movie, I can't recommend this movie as a finished package, as a complete film, because it just feels like such a jumble. And it is so jarring how it just casually switches between these multiple plot lines constantly without any kind of segue, without any kind of connecting arc or connecting theme. So I don't know. If you liked it, then I would love to hear why. I mean, feel free to comment, subscribe, like, and again, I would like to hear, if you like this movie, why did you like this movie? And if you did not like this movie and you feel that there was something I missed, feel free to let me know too. I'm completely open to criticism. So yeah, that was The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Not very good. And if anything, this has turned me off of these Spider-Man reboot movies even more. If you'll excuse me, I think I'm going to watch one of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. Because I'm not just saying that because they're nostalgic. I'm saying that because as films, I think they function better than these new ones. I think they're better made. Not just in terms of structure, but in terms of character development. In terms of tone, I think they're more fitting because they are essentially paying homage to the 60s Stan Lee Ditko Spider-Man movie or Spider-Man comics. And yeah, and even the first Amazing Spider-Man was better structured than this. The first Andrew Garfield Spider-Man was better structured than this. So if you really like these new Spider-Man movies, then I would say skip out on this for now. Rewatch the first Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, and then maybe rent this when it comes out on video if you have to know what happens next, because several of the scenes do actually pull you in. It's just the whole movie is just, it's pretty uneven. It's pretty disjointed. It's pretty jumbled. So yeah, as always, take that for what it's worth, and I will talk to you later.